Hi everybody, today we will be doing Unit 1, Block 1 of Counseling. It's Introduction to Counseling and Characteristics of a Counselor. In the curriculum, we have Introduction, Objectives, Definition of Counseling, Hallmark of a Counselor, Characteristics of a Counselor, and General. So what this unit talks about is about counselor, counseling, and the guidance issues. Normally, it's about counseling and guidance, and what is the difference between guidance and counseling. Then what are the characteristics of counseling and guidance, and how these two are different from psychotherapy. Then this also talks about how to deal with a counselor, an important aspect of counselor, what are the characteristics of counselor, what kind of training and educational qualification is needed to become a counselor in India and abroad, and also about the qualifications, certification and advancement in the field. So very basic, you already know most of it if you are studying counseling. So there are a lot of definition in here about counseling, but what I like and what is the simplest is this one, that counseling is performed face to face. It has to be a confidential session between the counselor and the client. It can be done any way, like telephone, in writing, on internet. These days video counseling is very common. Even one can do counseling via email, and there could be so many other forms too now as the new things evolving. I even heard that now AI is doing counseling with the X number of question. It's been there inside for people who doesn't feel very comfortable talking to a human. So now, as per the British Association of Counseling and Psychotherapy, they say that counseling takes place when a counselor sees that a client in a private and confidential setting to help or to explore a difficulty a client is having, or distress that the client may be experiencing, or maybe some dissatisfaction a client is facing, or in terms of life, or loss of sense or direction or purpose. Okay, so मैं पूरा पढ़ देती हूँ. I can say the whole definition. According to the British Association of Counseling and Psychotherapy, counseling takes place when a counselor sees a client in a private and confidential setting to explore difficulty a client is having, distress that the client may be experiencing, or perhaps a client's dissatisfaction with life, or loss of sense or direction or purpose. So very simple. If a client is, so how they are defining counseling is, it happens between a counselor and a client in private and confidential setting. Why? Because a client is facing dissatisfaction with his life, or he or she doesn't have loss of sense, or no direction or purpose, or the client is a little distressed or facing a difficulty. So this is about British Association for Counseling and Psychotherapy. Now what American Counseling Association says? It says there are so many definitions of counseling. One is counseling is a profession. Counseling deals with personal, social, vocational, empowerment and educational concerns. Counseling is conducted with persons who are considered to function within the normal range. Normal range means they are not patient. They don't need medical assistance. They need wellness assistance. Counseling is theory based and take place in structured setting. Yes, there is a structure for counseling. Counseling is a process in which clients learn how to make decisions and formulate their ways or new ways of behaving, feeling and thinking. Counseling encompasses various subspecialties. So these are some of the definition American Counseling Association has given. Now let's understand what is the difference between counseling and guidance. Now what is guidance? I'm sure you would have got guidance since you were a kid. So who gives us guidance? Our parents, our teachers, our mentors, our elders. They all are guiding us to help us or support us to take some future decisions, right? There's no problem there. They're just, we need to make some decisions. So guidance is that process. But when it comes to counseling, in counseling there's a problem attached. Okay, So there is a problem which needs to be identified, and counselors are the one who can do it. It requires special or specialized expertise to figure those problem out. Guidance doesn't solve any problem. Okay? Now there's so many people who think that okay, counseling is like you tell somebody do this and they just follow the instruction and it's done. No, it's not like that. Counseling is not giving our personal opinion or instruction or advice. It's a process of facilitation. We are facilitating listening and questioning so that our client choose the best solution for himself or herself. So it's a process. Okay, there's a very big difference between counseling and other medical practices. Counseling is a wellness based model wherein the other practices are medical model, like psychiatrist. It's a medical model. So counseling is not a medical model. Okay. What else? In guidance, it refers to the act or process of guiding. It's a type of counseling, but it doesn't provide, it doesn't give any solution to a problem, or it doesn't guide anybody towards any solution. Okay, it's just more like giving information, guiding in a very soft way. Now, what are the characteristics of the guidance? It's a continuous process, and it requires every stage of everybody or every person, not just in problematic situation but in general situation also. It's a positive program and it's a need of everybody. We need guidance since our childhood to our adulthood to our old age. Okay, now guidance is both generalized and specialized. Generalized is done by our parents, teachers, lecturers and more, and specialized it in the form of specialized service like qualified personnel as counselors, psychiatrists, psychologists, etc. Now, what is the difference between counseling and psychotherapy? Now, psychotherapy or personal counseling with a psychotherapist is an intentional interpersonal relationship which is used by a trained psychotherapist to help or to support a client or patient who has some problem in living. So, psychotherapy deals with serious problems like intrapsychic, internal, personal issues and conflicts. Mostly they are long term and they focuses more on reconstructive change. So every session bring a little change in the client. It focuses more on past than the present. It focuses more on insight than changing the client. It's very important that the therapist or the psychotherapist has this skill of being detached, not get attached with the emotions of the client. And the other one is it requires an expertise role. Okay, because one wrong question and one wrong way of doing something might take a client to a very different direction and might cause harm to him or her. Now, what are the hallmark of a counselor? Now, when we talk about effective counseling is a two-way street. It's a collaborative and cooperative effort by both the person who is getting the counseling and the counselor. And it takes commitment from both of them to make a decision, to move forward and make some difficult changes in behavior and thinking patterns. So it happens as way we do the counseling process. Now, counselors have so many meanings they talk about. One is licensed clinical counselors, and there is a marriage counselor, family counselor, psychologist, psychiatrist. There are counselors who are lawyers as well, who counsel in courts. Now there are people who represent states are also called counselors. Even there are counselors in church. So there are so many counselors called differently at different places. But now we are talking about the counselors who are also psychologists, like counseling psychology. Now, who is an effective counselor? Effective counselor is the one who can identify negative thinking patterns such as feeling of sadness and depression or anxiety out of all the conversation is happening in the session by the client. And also, effective counselor, what they do is they encourage um, client to build their personal strength and suggest them skills that can overcome their negative feelings or low self-esteem or hopelessness, and develop more positive attitude. Okay, it's very important. This is one of the important role of a counselor to bring a client from negative attitude to positive attitude, from hopelessness to positivity. A good counselor assists the client to make some positive changes in their relationship with others, helping them to recognize their own behavior and contribute, in their troublesome relationship so that it become more positive. Counselor also teach the effective ways of communicating, also sharing honest feedback without adding any judgment in it. Counselor skills also include obviously the knowledge of psychological theories, also understanding the human experiences. Without understanding of human experiences, the conversation will be more mechanical and robotic, which will not be very effective as a counseling session. So, counselors must be aware of the theories of personality and abnormal personalities, and they must be aware of multicultural issues as well, because we are dealing with human who comes from a very different background, experiences, and belief system. Now, what is a characteristic of a counselor? A counselor personality is crucial, especially a counselor needs to be open and not open to compromise on anything. Yeah, we should, as a counselor, we should not feel like, okay, the client is doesn't want to talk this, or if I'm doing this, I might lose my client, so I should not be honest so that I can keep getting money from that client. No, it should not be like that. We should be open, we should be honest, so that the process becomes more transparent, vulnerable, and positive in future. Effective counseling requires understanding of self and detailed awareness of the impact of oneself on others. So here we also need to know as a counselors that we should know who we are and how are we impacting on our client. The very important skill required is advanced listening skill. Normally in our day-to-day life, what we do is we listen only to answer the question or answer whatever our opinion is. So advanced listening skill means, can we just listen to the person with open mindset? Are we being present and listening without adding any judgment to it? So even listening skill itself take years to build sometimes. So it's very important. If you want to be a very effective counselor, or if you want to be a counselor in future, you start working on your listening skill. You can start with listening in general. If somebody is saying, even your family members or your colleagues or anybody, if they're talking to you, just start listening to their words, word to word, and see what happens instead of you replying quickly. Okay, so when you're listening, it's important that there should be empathy in the responses. Like, we should be empathic, and the client also, when client knows that you have a good listening ear, they are ready to open more, because they know that they won't be judged, but there is somebody who is present and listening. Then what else? So counseling is more about the conversational style. We all have different ways of talking. I believe that it's very important to talk softly and nicely to our client, because when we talk nicely and our conversations are more positive, it encourages a client. So as a person, like, I'm working on my conversation or my communication skills and my listening skill for 2 years, and I'm trying my best to work on my tone, my modality of the way I do my sessions, the pitch, the vibration, and there are a lot of things I'm working on. I'm still in the process, But right now, because I'm in a teaching mode, I'm talking in a very different way, because it's more me talking and everybody listening. But when it's two-way, it's very different. What else? Yes, another skill we need is the skill of assertiveness. We should know when to be assertive. We should not go or be diplomatic in the conversation. No, we need to be assertive. We should understand a client and confront the client when it is therapeutically appropriate. Very important skill, like I talked about advanced listening skill. There's another skill which is important, is communication skill, because if we are not good at communication, then we will not be able to understand what the client is saying. Always do session based on the communication skills we are good at. Like for me, I am good only in Hindi and English. So if I take up a client which got who come from regional language, maybe a little good in English, but when the way I will speak in English and the way he will understand my English, and then the way he or she will speak in English and I will understand English, would be very different. Okay, so even for a client, they should choose a counselor who has good command over the language they have, and same as the counselor should choose client who has good command over the similar language, so that the communication flow is good and we understand the aspect or what the client is saying. And client should also understand what we are asking, not like client says say something and then we say, oh no, this is not what I was asking this. So be careful with the communication skills and language. Also, there's one more important thing, is there's nobody who's gonna motivate you as a counselor, because most of the session happened in a very confidential setting. So as a counselor, one needs to figure it out, their source of internal motivation and drive, instead of looking for some external approval. Okay. Counselor needs to be also very careful that how they're impacting their own personal values, attitude and self-esteem to the client. So we need to be very careful with these aspects. Confidentiality is another key for a successful counseling. If we are doing a session with a client, we need to make sure that it doesn't go anywhere else. It should be between the counselor and the client. So confidentiality is another key aspect. We should not open up any session to anybody else, so that there should be more, so that there is a credibility which built up within the client and counselor relationship, and client becomes more open and vulnerable and ready to share more things because he and she trust you. So very important. And there are different licenses or different certifications who have their own code of ethics and competencies, which one must follow based on whatever style of counseling or structure we use, and we make sure that we follow our ethics and rules and competencies based on that. Now, what else? Yeah, empathy we already talked about, that empathy allows us to see the situation from the other person's view instead of what we want to see. It provides a grounding effect of plan of action and what could be feasible and achievable from the client's perspective. So empathy is important. That is also one of the skills we can develop. Then again, the counselors need to achieve credibility of being honest and consistent in the statement and action they share. They should not keep changing their statement, because clients are following the instruction. They are very careful. When they listen something from the counselor, they follow those things, and they even come back and say that, hey, this is what you said last time, now you are saying this, now there is a conflict whether I should do this and that might not good for the credibility of a counselor. So be very careful with that. Now counselors take risk every day and face rejection by their clients, and they face or the situation which they were not prepared to face. So see, in the beginning, it's very common. Counseling is a art. With rejection, with new learnings, we as a counselors evolve over a period of time. So in the beginning, you might not find client or somebody come, they don't like your style. Be open to them and ask them the feedback that what can you do one thing to improve yourself. It's a very good way of improving ourselves, and that also build confidence and credibility from client as well, that okay, this counselor is ready to learn more from my experiences. There's another very important aspect of counselor is they should not be racist, they should not discriminate anybody, they should not differentiate themselves with the client as well. There should not be any ego come in between the client and the counselor. So as I said, it's a collaborative affair, and there should be a lot of empathy, listening, presence, and confidentiality is needed in the whole process. And when we are cooperative and collaborative, and then we should see the person as a human, and we should give a human experience to that person by being there, not judging them on the basis of anything. Okay, so this is all about the characteristics of a counselor. Now there are educational qualification of a counselor. So I think you are already doing MS psychology, so you got those qualification. Once you finish your exam and you get the degree, you can start taking counseling session. But again, be careful, just getting degree doesn't make you a good counselor. There's a structure which you need to follow. If you follow the structure, you help the client, support the client, then only it's useful. That client will come back, also will tell 10 people about you. But if you don't know how to do it and you just do something, and if it doesn't help the client and become, or even backfires the client, then the client gonna tell 100 people not to go to this counselor. So before you practice on the client, make sure that you do a lot of peer counseling, learn from your peers and become better version of you. I would say do at least 100 hours of peer counseling, and then get into real client counseling. Okay, now you can do multiple certification if you want to. Like for clinical psychology, one needs to write an exam to become a licensed clinical psychologist. What else? And you can figure it out what you want to become. Based on that, you can figure it out. Your own qualification and certification you are needed based on the interest you have. Other qualification, I like this part, is what? Another qualification apart from the certification licenses, one should have a strong desire to help others and should be able to inspire respect, trust and confidence in other people as well. One should be able, or the counselor should be able to work independently as well as with the team, and all the counselors should follow code of ethics which is associated with the respective certification. Like I just said few minutes ago, counselor must possess high physical and emotional energy to handle the different types of problem the client will address, and they should know how to deal with daily problems when it causes stress. Okay, now certification and advancement, you guys can do it by yourself. You are already doing one degree from India. If you want to do some certification from abroad, you can do that. You can see what all certification you can do which can allow you to do counseling abroad as well as in India. Now the last point is counselor and values. So it talks about that as a human we all comes with different values, right? So both client and counselor will hold certain principles to do interpersonal conduct, right? They both have different value system. So it is very important to note that everyone's value system is likely to have some contradiction. right? And that can result in high level of anxiety. So we need to be very careful with that. But we need to overpass that and grow. Sometimes what happens is in this session, clients deal with the inability to decide between the possible causes of action, which they need to explore, modify or adopt based on their own value system. It's not easy for them to do it because it goes maybe against their value system. What else? Yeah, it's very important that all the session a counselor does needs to be done non-judgmentally and should not add or entertain any of their own disbelief or that what was that halo effect in the session. And they should not suggest any model or alternative or anything to the client has to figure it out their own way. If a counselor has a sense of missionary zeal or a desire to impose a set of beliefs or the skills they think would work for the client, or think that, oh, this could be the right way for the client to come out of this, then those sessions are ineffective and it might disrupt the well-being of the client as well, because what you think is right might be not right for the client. Again, effective communication is very important. Now, it also talks about effective counseling, which implies the values of tolerance, acceptance, and respect for the individual. So, as a counselor, are we tolerant enough, or are we acceptable enough, or are we ready to respect that individual with whatever they are talking using our communication? Also, whatever we are saying or the question we are asking to the client, is he or she getting the message across? What as a counselor, if I ask a question and the client understands something else and answers something else, then I say, oh, this is not what I was asking. Then this might confuse the client, thinking that he's not or she's not able to understand what I'm asking, and the session become ineffective. So it's very important to communicate clearly. Both communication and counseling call upon knowledge. It's very important. You're already learning about psychology, about counseling. So what you're doing, you're actually getting knowledge. Then you're understanding of action-based techniques to promote constructive interpersonal dynamics. Sometimes knowledge could be quite destructive also. So it's because for clients who are usually at their most vulnerable stage, they come for counseling. So it is very important for a counselor that they have to protect their client from any further abuse or misuse of authority and status. Okay, so we need to protect the fragility of a client. Effective counselors hold ethical values and effective communicators often do not have. So इसका मतलब क्या है? What is this guy saying? कि effective counselor always hold ethical values that effective communicators often do not. So they are talking about, it doesn't mean even if you are a good communicator, doesn't mean that you are a good counselor, effective counselor. So with good communication comes with ethical values, then only a person becomes, or a counselor become, a effective counselor. So I think this is it. I can read up the sum up session. So in this unit, what we learned the concept of counseling and the characteristics of an effective counselor. Now, who is effective counselor? An effective counselor does not require more than effective communication skills. Counseling is definitely a discipline on its own. It is our belief that one cannot be an effective counselor without being an effective communicator. However, effective counselor goes beyond effective communication. Effective counselors have a strong knowledge base, the awareness of their own human values, human vulnerability, a desire to continue searching and awareness that they are often dealing with vulnerable and easily influenced people. They are trained, and many training and refresher programs are organized for them so that they are in touch with the latest trend and their skills and knowledge are updated. Counselors can be responsible for the client emotional life and death, which is indeed a very heavy burden to shoulder, and one should be taken up consciously and willingly. If this is not the case, then it is possible the counselor may just be an effective communicator. Now, I want to share one thing between effective communicator and having a hold on language plus counselor. So, effective communicator doesn't mean that you need to know a very good English. Okay? It means that even if you are good in any language, for example, my mother tongue is Hindi. Okay? If I have a good hold on Hindi and I'm talking to a client who is also speaking in Hindi, but if I don't talk properly even in Hindi, that he or she is not able to understand what I'm talking, then is a challenge. Then the communication will not be effective. Okay? So it's important that we should hold off our language. We should do sessions with the language with both client and the counselor know. Plus, we should be communicative in a way that we understand each other language. Okay? I hope I'm clear with that. So it says that you don't need like English as a communication language, a skill. Okay? It could be any language, but you make sure that the right question reaches to the rightly to the client. And the same, when the client is saying something, that also reaches you as a counselor so that you can ask another powerful question based on what client is answering. Because client will be talking for 10-15 minutes and you will be asking one question. So were you able to understand the belief system of the client, experiences of the client, the environment of the client, and the other aspect of the client, the body language, and based on that, were you able to ask something which was equally powerful for the client to explore more in his or her journey, to figure it out, the action plan, and then more. So this is it. We'll meet you in the next class. Bye. Good night.